Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Jennifer Adelstein, and I am the Marketing Assistant for Industrial Controls. Today's webinar is on paperless recorder networking technology to eliminate paper charts. The presentation will take about 45 minutes. Everyone will be muted so we don't experience any outside noises that would disrupt the presentation. After the presentation, we will take some time to answer your questions. Feel free to type your questions into the chat interface on your control panel located on the right-hand side of your screen, and they will be addressed at the end. We will also open it up to voice questions where you can raise your hand by clicking the hand icon on your control panel, and you will be unmuted so you can communicate directly with the speaker. Now we are going to hear from our presenter. Bill Hopler of Industrial Controls has a BS degree in electrical engineering from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. He worked for 13 years as a sales engineer for Honeywell's Process Management Division and has worked for Industrial Controls for the last 14 years. Bill teaches customer seminars on flow technology, industrial wireless solutions, and gas detection. So at this time, I will pass it over to Bill to get us started.
Thank you, Jen. Today we're going to talk about paperless recorders. Some of the manufacturers that make this product call them electronic data recorders. I have a tendency to refer to them as paperless recorders, but don't be deceived by that term because they do much, much more than replacing a paper recorder. That's what we'll discuss today. Industrial Controls is a leading distributor of both HVAC controls and process instrumentation for more than 150 manufacturers, to include companies like Honeywell, Siemens, GE, Johnson Controls, ASCO, Ashcroft, etc. And we have a multitude of solutions on the process side, one of which, of course, is the paperless recorder that we'll speak of today. And for those of you that have the Industrial Controls catalog, the pages that refer to the paperless recorder are 223 to 230. And what's interesting is that many of the inputs to the paperless recorder are also things that we get involved with. Flow meters, vortex meters, for example, for steam, gas meters for measuring natural gas, temperature transmitters, level transmitters, etc. So the paperless recorder is capable of accepting many of these inputs. We're also quite good in the area of industrial and commercial valves. We have a lot of the products that customers are looking for, and even more than that, we have the solutions, and our people are capable of assisting customers when they call in. For example, if at the end of this webinar you have some interest in getting a quote on a paperless recorder, when you call in to our phone number, the people that answer the phone are capable of taking you through the questions that need to be asked in order to give you the correct model number and the solution. We don't need you, or do we force you to go ahead and pick the model number before we can give you a quotation. And we do a lot of things in the way of classroom training, one of which is the webinar series which we're conducting as we speak. So previous webinars that I've been involved in, we did one last year in gas detection. We did one earlier this year with humidity. That's a very common input to our paperless recorder technology. Temperature measurement basics, and combustion controls for industrial boilers. So why are customers switching from paper to paperless? One of the main reasons is that the data is encrypted and acceptable by agencies like FDA, DEP, EPA, NADCAP, which is the heat treating organization that takes into consideration the quality of the manufacturing of airline parts, and NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So all these people have accepted it. So those of you that may think that the data can be changed, it cannot. It is in an encrypted format. And you'll find as we go through today that the paperless recorder is just as easy to configure, and in some cases easier than a paper recorder. Same with calibration. I'll show you the calibration screen that comes up when you go to check the as found calibration on your paperless recorder. And of course, no pens, no charts, no jams. There was a time where the FDA, for example, when they come in to give an audit, would see some notes in the compliance data indicating a chart was jammed or the pens ran out of ink, and at that time they may or may not give the customer a pass. I'm here to tell you that the feedback I get is that if a chart fails or the pen runs out of ink, there's a 4 to 6 hour report that's required in order to justify that the parameters were within FDA regulations at the time the chart jammed. Also, there's not a huge difference in price. You know, the paperless recorders start in the area of $1,600. The data is stored in electronic buffers and automatically transferred to flash memory card or by the network, which we'll talk about. And there is no hard drive in the paperless recorder. There are features like web page. A lot of companies are now embedding web pages in their products to make it easy for viewing by the customer at his desk, even though the paperless recorder may be out in the process area. And there's something called file transfer protocol, which allows you to automatically retrieve the archived data from the recorder over the network and put that on your server. Makes that a lot easier to archive data. And the other thing that's interesting, at least in our firm, we have all 3 of the recording products. We have the circular recorder, which we still buy by the pallet. There's still some people that want to stay with that technology, and that's fine. Strip chart recorders for larger point counts. And of course, we have the paperless recorder, so we're in a spot where we're not pressuring or arm twisting any one individual to make that leap to the paperless technology, even though we think that that's the future. Some other paperless recorder features that we'll talk about. It's quite easy. A lot of the manufacturers out there now have the touch screen, so you can do your screen navigation and your configuration, if you like, actually at the front of the faceplate of the paperless recorder. Or we'll talk about the PC tool, which allows you to do that configuration offline and then download that over the network or upload it with a jump drive at the recorder. The TFT technology is the same technology that's used in the GPS systems in automobiles. Gives you a nice wide viewing angle. The environmental specs on the paperless recorder you might be interested to find is now as good as the paper recorder, up to 50 degrees C environmental and 95% humidity. You will see that you now get multiple screen views of the data, whereas with the paper recorder, you're pretty well dedicated to the type of chart that you have, horizontal, vertical, or circular. Data integrity, again, I mentioned that again because that's very important in the compliance businesses. You've got all the data security and passwords, and in fact, there's an audit trail which meets the 21 CFR Part 11 requirements of the pharma biotech business. Communications and networking flexibility. I encourage everyone, if you go this route, the first thing I would recommend you do is put it on your network immediately so that you take advantage of the technology and don't just replace paper with paperless. The PC tool supports data analysis and configuration of the network. There's a custom screen capability. And with the USB, PCMCIA, and Ethernet, there's a lot of choices and capabilities of doing data archiving. Now, this is what typically a paperless recorder looks like from the front. It comes in a couple of different sizes. There's a 5-inch diagonal display. For smaller point count applications, there's a 10.5-inch diagonal display. For larger point counts, up to 48. You've got an industrial ruggedized touchscreen. In fact, the manufacturers even make the peel-off NASCAR type plastic tear-offs, for dirty applications. The manufacturers actually put a little pen up in the top here, so you can use that to navigate your touchscreen or your finger. There's actually a full instruction book on the machine, so if there's any questions that come up when you're out there doing a configuration or navigation, you can actually call up the instruction manual. And we have lots of capabilities when it comes to storage. So there's a flash memory card, a PCMCIA card, and there's a USB port that has many features, one of which is the ability to download data. So if you were not networked on your network system, you would be able to retrieve the data with a jump drive or a flash memory card, download the data, bring that back to your desktop that's got the manufacturer's software on it, upload it, archive it, and wind up with the same type of data as if you had when you networked it, but then people need to write SOPs to do that. So again, as I said earlier, if you buy one of these, put it on the network and take full advantage of the capabilities. The USB port also has the capability to accept the barcode reader, which can mark the chart with the batch number. You can actually plug in a keyboard, a mouse, or even a printer. So a lot of capability from the front of the paperless recorder. From the back, you've got a couple of power options. 115 volts AC is most typical, but there is also DC and AC instrument power. You can get a 24-volt DC onboard power supply to power those flow transmitters that we talked about, steam meters and gas meters. And then you've got, depending on the size and the capability, a number of cards for analog input channels, analog output channels, and a number of cards for relay outputs, digital in and digital out. Then in some cases you've got a USB port on the back, RS-485, and pretty much everyone today is making their paperless recorders with Ethernet. Out of the box, it's not even an option anymore. So we talked earlier about the different amount of screens. You could have up to 10 different screens, and the nice part about that is you can have an operator screen, which is your normal display as people walk by and look at the recorder on a daily or hourly basis. But for the process engineer or for the plant manager, he could have a different way of seeing that data. So he could have just digital. We call those panel meters. We've got bar graphs. Some people like horizontal trends. Some people like the vertical trends, bar graphs and trends, and lots of combinations. But here's the key. All these display formats are pre-built. These are not custom graphics. These are pre-built displays that you pick during configuration, and then all you do is put the point names you want in each one of those displays. So pretty nice stuff. The one that I like, my most favorite one, is the horizontal trend with the pens and scale, and then the live digital value. The operators seem to like this because when they come over to the screen, instead of finding the blue pen or the purple pen and interpolating as to what the value is, they just match up the pen color, the pen trace, and the digital, and that way they know the live digital value of that particular parameter. And by the way, you can configure these to be your own tags, obviously, instead of just calling them pen 1, pen 2. Chart speeds. We can change chart speeds like you can on a paper recorder from the front of the screen. One of the most important things to recognize is that the chart speed is not related to the logging or the capture of the data. So what most people do on the trend is they pick a chart speed that gives you the history of the chart for the time period that you want the operators to see. You know, the last 2 hours, last 8 hours, last 24 hours. And these are all configurable to chart speeds. You can also replay the chart when you're at the recorder. You know, if you left your shift and came in the next morning knowing that one of the parameters was misbehaving, and instead of going to your desktop to check on it, you can go right after the recorder and using the touch screen go back in time and see what that parameter did overnight, see what that trend was, or you can do that at your desktop. You can also mark the chart, which is another neat feature. A lot of people ask me that, Bill, I like the paperless, but how do I write on the paper chart? And the answer is, if you select that function on the front of the recorder, up will pop a QWERTY keyboard, and then you would go in and put that message, the operator's name, the fact that a thermocouple burned out, or whatever that might be. Here we see here's a power on, power off that's actually captured on the chart. And whenever you look at that chart on the recorder or at the archived data, you will now have captured those marks on the chart as part of the permanent history record. Now, Field IO, I'm going to go through this quickly, but my point is just to prove to you that configuring a paperless recorder is as easy or easier than a paper recorder. You've got all your types of analog inputs. You've got the voltage. You've got the milliamps. You've got all the various thermocouples, type J, type K. You've got analog output options. You can take pulse inputs. You can take digital inputs. So you can actually mark the chart to indicate that a piece of process equipment is running. So you know when that chart was recording temperature and humidity, you know, for example, that air handler was running. So it's a pretty neat stuff from an I/O standpoint. Then the second part of the configuration, whether you do it on the recorder or in the configuration tool, is setting up the pen. So for example, if you had a type J thermocouple, it would be unlikely that you want to display that minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit to plus 2400. You just want to capture that part of the range, let's say 1000 to 2000. to make that chart look nice and even when you archive the data. Also in this part, you have the opportunity to put math in. So for example, we've got pen 2 here, and if you just put an A2, that means you're basically just trending or putting on the chart what the value of that analog input 2 was. But you could very easily use math in there and say, let pen 2 equal the total of pen 1 plus pen 3. So you can actually do some nice, interesting math, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some examples. And here's your scaling. You can do linear, you can do logs, and then set the logging rate. Now, there was a time that fuzzy logging was popular, and that's when the paperless recorders did not have the memory that they have today, and that was a feature that would allow you not to log a piece of data if it was within a certain percentage of the last time you logged it. But with today's performance and abilities of buffers, very few people are using fuzzy logging these days. And again, to reiterate, the logging rate is separate from the chart speed, so you don't have to compromise one versus the other, the display versus the logging. And you have several examples. You can do a sample, an average, or even some min-maxes. And you can actually do a width adjustment. I had a customer recently that had 12 thermocouple inputs who wanted to calculate the average. So we did a math, pen 1 through pen 12 divided by 12, and actually trended that as a virtual point, pen 13, so we could see all 12 pens plus the average of all 12, and he made the 12th, the 13th pen, if you will, a thicker line, so it would be very clear what the average was on this process. Pretty interesting. This is also where you set up alarms, and you can do high, low, rate, and multiple alarms, up to 6 alarms on each pen. And those can be soft alarms, in which case they may just mark the chart. They may just display on the recorder, or they actually could trigger a relay output that sounds a horn or a strobe. We have totalizers with a lot of capabilities. I'll talk about that a little bit further down the road. Passwords, a lot of capability in terms of user administration. For 21 CFR Part 11, we've got the timeout features and the roving passwords, all of which are able to be set up in policy. You can set up how long the timeouts are, how many retries before you get locked out of the recorder, and the password expiration time is adjustable up to 365 days. So a lot of password capability. Calibration, instead of looking at the paper chart, this is the calibration screen. So you would hook your plant standard in the back of the recorder like you would for the I/O of a paper recorder, and then you would just go through the calibration screen to do the as found, as left, and or adjustments. So very, very, very similar to the paper recorder calibrations. I talked about the help menu. You can actually call that up while you're at the recorder. So let's talk about some of the cool features. And one of the things I try to tell people is if you buy a paperless recorder, don't buy it just to replace the paper. Take advantage of some of the capabilities like reports, printing screen, totalizers, events, marking the chart, math, custom screens, and some of these other things that we'll be talking about. And by the way, all these have already been installed for years at EPA, NADCAP, which is the heat treating organization, the NRC. We did a job in South Jersey with 110 paperless recorders to replace their aging paper recorders, all seismically tested, and of course the FDA. So here's an interesting aspect. When you go through and decide which of these functions you're going to take advantage of, math, remote viewing capabilities, events, etc. In a lot of cases with a paper recorder, you pretty much had to decide up front which of those features you needed, because that was either a hard card or a PROM that went in the recorder. So there are some companies that have something called firmware credits, and what this allows you to do is to pick what you think you will need in terms of credits, and then if you will, buy a bucket of these credits, and as long as you don't exceed that total number of credits at any given time, which means you can turn them on, turn them off at your leisure, you're still able to take advantage of all those functions. Things like math, OPC, and remote viewing, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But an interesting approach to turning on and off functions in your paperless recorder and taking full advantage of the technology. Okay, reports. You can actually create a report on the recorder. And the best way to show you that is actually show you an example. So here's a case where I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pens, and I have configured a report that will show me the max value and the time and the min value of the time for the time that's appropriate to what you set it for, daily, weekly, monthly, etc. And as we'll see in a little while, if you're able to tie this to events, the recorder has a real-time clock in it. So you can trigger these reports to be put together daily, weekly, monthly basis, captured in the recorder as part of the saved files. And also, if you use the events on the email, you can actually email those at the end of the week, the day, or the month. Printing, we can actually do a screen dump to a network printer. So if the process manager sees an anomaly in the process for the humidity, when he's walking by the chart, he can actually, with the touch screen and the password, touch a few targets, and he can actually print a screen print of that particular recorder, snapshot if you will, on a network printer. Okay, totalizers, a lot of capability with totalizers. We just finished up an interesting job. We put 15 paperless recorders in remote flow stations using wireless Verizon to bring that data back into a customer server using file transfer protocol. But the cool part about it is we are showing the pen value. Okay, in this case it's 20 GPM. We're showing the pen total in gallons, all right? And in this particular operation, we actually did something called a surge total. So by using the math capabilities and events, the customer wanted to have a separate totalizer that would only totalize when the flow rate went above 80% of the span. So we had two totalizers, one the running totalizer and two the surge totalizer, and that's how this particular customer was billing their customers. They billed them extra when they were in the surge category. Okay, event markers. This is a concept where you can pick a cause and actually have that result in an event. Something simple as marking the chart. So for example, if you set an alarm to be at 10% over the desired value of humidity, that could actually display on the recorder and actually could mark the chart with the tag name, the value when it hit alarm, and also the time that it was caused. And some of the other things that we can do is we can start totalizers, digital inputs. As I said earlier, using the events, a digital input can actually capture the fact that a piece of equipment was turned on or turned off, and that again becomes part of the permanent record in the archive of the recorder. There are a number of ways to mark the chart. As I said earlier, you got the QWERTY keyboard that comes up, so that can be done manually. You can also pre-configure 20 preset markers that you use time and time again. For example, you could have 20 operators' names. So when the operator came on shift, he could go in, log in, and actually pick his operator name, and that would then print on the chart. So you would know that for this shift on Tuesday the 23rd of May, Joe was the operator that was keeping an eye on the process. So some pretty neat things in terms of markers. And these events can cause emails. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute, but I could actually have a cause turn around and actually be an event. So you could actually, in my alarm example, you could actually email those alarms to up to 12 mail recipients, and this can be done automatically. So here's a neat project. We did a job up in Morris County, New Jersey, where a customer had 17 boilers in 5 different buildings, and he was required by the state to monitor the gas usage on a monthly and yearly basis and then submit that to the state at the end of the year with his boiler efficiency test. So we put in, early on, we put in 17 gas meters on each of those devices. Some were boilers, some were large hot water heaters. And early on in the discussion, the gas meter will show you a total and a rate. And the customer asked me, well, how do I archive that? And I said, well, we can have someone come out with a log sheet, once a week, once a day, once a month, And his comment was, I don't think that's going to happen. What else can you do? So we took those 17 gas meters and hooked those to 5 different paperless recorders that were in the 5 different buildings. And at the end of the month, triggered by the real-time clock and the event and report feature in the recorder, actually emailed the proper people the monthly use of every one of the 17 gas meters in his 5 different sites. And then he archived those over 12 months. And at the end of the year, he submits that to the state for compliance. So kind of interesting application to take advantage of totalizing reports, events, and the email feature in the recorder. Math functions. I mentioned earlier about the averaging. So a lot of capabilities there. And a real application for those of you on the phone that might be in power plants. We've done a number of jobs for the steam turbines for the major power companies. So what they do is they monitor the health of the turbine by looking at somewhere around 24 thermocouples on the turbine shell. And they need to keep a track of that average to make sure that the turbine is not overheating before they cause some damage. So many of our customers have asked us to do 2 things. One, do an average, but even more important than that, thermocouples which are likely to burn out. If a thermocouple would burn out on that average of pen 1 through pen 12 divided by 12, that would skew significantly the average. So we wrote a script program using the math equation that would allow you to throw out any thermocouple that's burned out so you don't skew the average. So again, take advantage of the technology if you're going to make that transition from paper to paperless. Batch capabilities. For those of you that do batches like the heat treater, you can actually use that feature, put in the batch ID number, either manually with the QWERTY keyboard or even with the barcode reader. So you can scan in the batch number before you start it, start the batch, archive the batch, end the batch with notes, and more importantly, now when you go to look for that batch number a year later, you can go into the archive on your server and search that data by batch number, and then print that out and send it out to your customer. So pretty interesting feature. Custom screens. I have a customer recently who was controlling 4 furnaces with one of the large paperless recorders, and he liked the idea of multiple screens but didn't want to switch from screen 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, so he used a software package called Screen Designer that allowed him to put 4 charts on his main screen, so he can now see the charts for each of his 4 furnaces on one screen, and if he wants to go in more detail, then he'll go to the second or third screen on the recorder. Okay, communications, connectivity. I've said this once, I've said it twice, I'll say it again. If you buy this technology, please put it on the network. There's so many capabilities to see the recorder from your desk, see it from the network, see it from a remote site if you can get through your security wall, which a lot of people can today, and it also makes the archiving of data a lot easier. So there's a feature that most people are putting in their devices these days, and it's the web page. We call it the remote viewer. So what you're able to do with a password is you can, with no software, you don't need the vendor software, all you need is a web browser. I use Internet Explorer. And if you put in the IP address of the recorder that's put in during startup, you are now, with the password and user ID, able to look at that recorder and see what the faceplate is that's being shown out at the process. And on top of that, with another password, you can actually change the recorder screen and actually change configuration on the recorder. So it's basically you're sitting at the desk, at your desk, as if you were actually at the front of the recorder. So Trend Server Pro, that's the software I was referring to. It does a number of things. One, it's a offline configuration tool and allows you to do that configuration. If you're not on the network, you can configure the recorder before it's delivered, download that to a jump drive, plug the recorder in when it gets delivered and powered up, upload that, and you're good to go instead of, although you could actually configure the recorder at the touch screen. It also has the capability of doing the analysis by going back in time. So when you bring that data up into the Trend Server Pro, I do this a lot of times on a startup, is I'll look at the trend of the process, and then I'll do a print screen and a copy into an email, and I can send the actual time that I put into the Trend Server Pro of that particular parameter, and I can email that to my production guy, my maintenance guy, or to my customer. So a lot of capabilities there, plus the file transfer protocol that we talked about earlier. So file transfer protocol, FTP is what people call that. And the cool part about it is if you're on the network, you're able either periodically on a scheduled basis or on a demand basis, go down, bring up the latest data from the paperless recorder buffer and append the existing trend in the Trend Server Pro. It's real important to understand that once you put data in your software package, each subsequent time you go down and do an FTP, it just appends the graph. So when you pull up that graph, it automatically has attached to it the latest data. So a lot of my customers do an FTP at midnight, so that when they come in the morning, they've got the latest data up until midnight. And if they're running a batch that didn't end until early in the morning, they would go in and do a manual FTP, in which case they have all the data on their server without having to go out to the recorder. There's also something called OPC. There was a time that in order to interface a PLC or someone's DCS system to a device like a paperless recorder, there had to be code that was written. And then there was a lot of talk about Modbus TCP/IP, which is available now, but the latest trend is something called OPC, which is a technique that allows, for example, a paperless recorder to talk to a PLC or a DCS on your network without having to go through the vendor's application software like Trend Server Pro. It's a pretty cool feature. It's available in the credits of the recorder, and I encourage you to take a look at that if you want to interface your paperless recorders with something like a building management system. So that pretty well takes care of the discussion. Jen's going to read some questions in a minute, but before we do that, for those of you that haven't been on our website or haven't seen our catalog, I encourage you to do that. You can get a copy of the catalog and actually go through the section, the recorder section that has the paper, paperless, circular chart and strip chart. You can also now go on our website and you can turn the pages electronically, and you've got a nice little search engine. So kind of a cool way to get right to the spot in the catalog, so you can go in and type paperless recorder in the search engine of the catalog part of the website, and it will tell you exactly what page the paperless recorder information is on. We also have online chat. You can see our training schedules, literature requests, tech tips, case studies, and the webinars like today's will be posted up there for your colleagues to review if they did not have the opportunity to be on the webinar with us today. We had trouble getting our catalog down to 1,200 pages, 100,000 products. It's color-coded. It's a part number index, manufacturers. You know, a lot of people don't like the paper, but the people that have gotten our catalog sometimes like to use it to look at, oh, Industrial Controls does have that particular product line. Let me see what that looks like. Okay, pick up the phone or go to the website and see it electronically. So with that, if any of you need to get in touch with me, that's my contact information, email and mobile phone number, but please feel free. Jen's going to send out a little survey that you can respond to also, but please feel free to contact me if I can help you out in any way.
Okay, thank you, Bill. At this time, I would like to read some of the questions that we received through the chat. The first one is from Daniel. He asks, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Sopic View. Will that software be able to handle the new paperless recorders?
Yeah, I don't know of that particular package, but if it has the capability to look at a device that has Ethernet using Modbus TCP/IP, then the answer is yes. So in the Honeywell or in the paperless recorder manufacturer's book instruction manual, you will see the Modbus addresses. So if that particular software package does have Modbus TCP/IP capability, you just tell it to fetch the data points out of the Modbus addresses in the paperless recorder.
Okay, thank you. We received another question in from Mark. He asks, we have many QXs in use, but we have been down for 2 years and power has been shut off to the units. Are there any issues we need to be aware of? Will we lose our programming or anything else? We have downloaded the chart data and set up info to the CF card and USB. Is there anything else we need to know about? We are not on the network with these units yet.
Yeah, I would say that all the configuration data is in the double EEPROM of the recorder. So I believe that you'll be okay. There is a battery in there whose sole purpose is to keep the real-time clock running. And I don't recall what that length of time is that battery is good for, especially in a power down situation. But if that individual would like to send us an email at moreinfo@icdmail.com, I will get a direct answer from the Honeywell tech support people.
Okay, thank you. We received another question in from Michael. He asks, what is the max number of pens? 12 plus 1?
The maximum number of pens is on the larger diagonal display, which is the 10.5 inch, and you can have a total of 48 hard analog inputs. And in addition to that, you can have 48 virtual inputs. And that's kind of an interesting point. So I could have 48 analog inputs. I could have 48 other points, which are calculated points, or over that TCP/IP Ethernet from a PLC, I can bring in 48 more parameters from the PLC or the building management system or the DCS. So I could actually view up to 96 parameters total, but 48 hardwired inputs.
Okay. Another question in from Michael. Are credits needed to purchase some of the recorder features?
Yes, they are. If you look at the spec sheet online or through our website, you will see what those individual credits are worth. For example, the remote viewer is worth 2. The totalizer is worth 3. So what most people do is they'll look and see, well, you should know right away whether you're using totalizers or not. And then you come up with that, and then you can buy them anywhere from buckets of 2 up to 30, 40, 50 if you're using everything in total, including batch and OPC and all the features maxed out. So, and the other interesting thing is most people I work with and have worked through this, I encourage them to buy a few more credits than they think they need. But I had a situation recently where a customer said, no, I'm not going to use the batch feature. But once he saw the recorder, he thought that was so powerful. So what he did was he gave me his electronic serial number embedded in the recorder, and I sent that off to Honeywell, and for $200 or $300, he added another 10 or 15 credits, and there was no cable required, no PROM required, no firmware required. He just went in and logged back in with his new electronic serial number, and magically he had 10 more credits. So it's a pretty interesting thing to be able to add credits, but I encourage people to buy a few more than you need, and that way you'll be able to take advantage of the features.
Okay. A question in from Kevin. He asks, are the credits transferable between recorders? If a recorder is configured using credits and it needs to be replaced, does the replacement recorder need to have credits already installed?
If you put a replacement recorder, and the credits are tied to the electronic serial number of the recorder, so the answer to this question is no, you cannot transfer the credits.
Okay. All right, so we seem to be out of time today. If you missed any part of today's presentation, we will post a recorded version on our website, industrialcontrolsonline.com, and within the next couple of days, we will email you a link to the video and our contact information if you have any further questions or feedback for future webinars. I just sent you a survey link through the chat feature on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We would greatly appreciate it if you would fill out the survey and let us know what you thought about today's presentation and provide us with recommendations for future webinar topics that you're interested in. So at this point, we thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to having you back shortly.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, everyone.
an echo or something, so you couldn't hear general